We're live. Let's go.
Great, thanks, Alex. Welcome everybody to Office Hours number 21. After our special fireside last week, we're going to return to a slightly more of our regular agenda this week and go through our typical sections like Node Watch, Repo Watch, some highlights from the forums, and we have Oliver today with us. Oliver has joined the foundation on the governance side. He's going to be managing governance at the foundation, and he's going to talk a little bit about one of the initiatives that he's working on that he was talking about earlier today on the Core Devs call. So to kick us off, let's get through Node Watch. There's not a great deal of interesting stuff happening in the Node release space right now. So I've just basically, if you take a look in the Office Hours chat, I have linked my notes there so you can see links to all of these different versions of the nodes if you need them or you want to read the change notes. No changes on the Geth side of things, at least on the release channel. Open Ethereum is on RC3 right now. That came out about 7 days ago. If you happen to like to compile your OpenETH client from the source code, then you're possibly going to need to upgrade Rust so that you have the up-to-date version of Rust, which is a requirement for the latest release. Regards Aragon, there was a new alpha, July the 1st alpha, that came out 5 days ago. There is a extensive list of, as usual, the change notes there. I just wanted to highlight again and reiterate something that we've been discussing probably over the last month on Office Hours around this ETH call determinism bug that Alex and Leo and a number of other people have been working on with Aragon to fix. That was fixed in the June the 4th release of Aragon. So if you happen to be using what was known as TurboGeth prior to that release, then for peace of mind and to make sure that you don't have any determinism issues related to this specific bug, it's recommended that you resync your subgraphs that have been synced by a TurboGeth node older than the June the 4th release. Worth noting as well that if you don't use a clean database, so if you weren't to scrub, for example, the entire database here, you need to clean out your ETH call cache table as well. And I imagine that's quite relevant because there are some subgraphs maybe that people will want to scrub and start from fresh, and others they will want to keep. And I've also linked in the notes the original announcement from Leo a week ago or so, which explains in a little bit more detail what the issue was and how it was fixed. And it's just an announcement in Discord. Yeah, and is there anything else anyone wants to bring up on the Node side of things? Stake Machine, anything you wanted to bring up on the Aragon side of things, where we are with that at the moment?
Not really. I'm most interested about new pairs for the agent, for the clarity, so when we can claim many and so on, so when these pairs will be merged.
Right, so maybe we'll be able to talk about some of that in the Repo Watch section. The only thing I have down for Repo Watch this week, I just put it in quickly because Ryabina put out a new version of their dashboard today at graphscan.io, and it's a major overhaul from their old one, and it's much faster to retrieve data than their older one, so highly recommend you go over and have a look at that if you haven't already. Seb or anyone else, do you have any other software related things you wanted to bring up on this call? Anything you've seen?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, and Stake Machine, if I heard you correctly, you're interested to know when the agent might be able to do things like claim many on vouchers, right?
Yeah.
Right, we would need. I don't know if you can comment on that, Ford. It's been Janice in the past that's been sort of talking about moving towards being able to claim multiple rebates at the same time. Are you involved in any of that side of the agent?
Well, right now we have an open PR from Chris actually on his grant work for for closing and allocating in one call. So that'll increase the efficiency of reallocating pretty significantly. And then there's some follow-up work to integrate claim many. I don't think it's very complex work. Maybe he could speak to that a bit, but I imagine we'll have that in within the next 2 weeks. I don't have much more specific time than that.
Yep. So the close and allocate PR has been opened, has been sitting there for some time, and I've tested it quite thoroughly, and I think it's ready to go. The claim many work, which applies to query fee rebates, which are claimable 7 days after vouchers are redeemed. That PR is also open. It's currently marked as a draft, and I need to just update the PR docs on that, but I've also been running that on testnet for quite a while now. Maybe coming up on a week, and my agent's been successfully batching together rebate claims. There's a final piece of work that I might come to soonish, which is around batching voucher claims. That one is also straightforward-ish, but there's some behavior in the agent right now that I don't like, and so I might seek to edit that a little bit or introduce a new configuration flag. Specifically, as it stands today, you can pass the allocation claim threshold argument, but somewhat unintuitively, if your agent swaps receipts for a voucher and the voucher's value is lower than that threshold, it will actually delete the voucher, so you'll just lose those query fees permanently. And that is unintuitive and probably not what people want. So I'm going to add a new param just to kind of explicitly control the deletion threshold. But yeah, otherwise, the close and allocate is ready to go. The rebate batch claim many is also pretty much ready to go. I just got to update the docs, and then hopefully voucher comes soon as well.
The piece there, Chris, for some reason there's a bit of static on your mic. I'm not sure why.
Check your gain in the Discord settings. You might have it turned up to 200% or something like that, Chris.
So while you're doing that, you mentioned there the claim threshold. I had a discussion, I think on Sunday, with Janice about that, and he confirmed the behavior that you were seeing. And within, 5 minutes, he'd written a PR to fix that. So the agent, I believe it's still a PR, but the agent will, whenever that's merged, it won't be deleting the receipts or the vouchers. It will be holding on to them until a claim is actually made. Whether that's ad infinitum forever, or there's still some kind of threshold where the receipt would be forgotten, I don't know, but certainly it won't be immediately deleted once that PR is merged.
Awesome, cool. Well, yeah, that paves the way for the rebate batch claim work, so that's great. I do think it probably makes sense to have some kind of deletion threshold, because there is some value of voucher that is so low that even if you were to batch it with like 100 other vouchers, it would still be, it wouldn't make rational economic sense to claim the voucher. You'd do so at a loss. But
at the moment, Chris, right? But the reason I brought this up with Janice was because who knows what happens in the future, right? There may come a time when it economically makes sense to claim them, right? But also, to my understanding, and which is relatively lay here, this is not like something sitting on the chain that you could come back in a millennia and it's still there, right? This is something that exists within the somewhere in a file system, right, on the gateway or something like that. It's the receipts themselves, or do those actually exist only on our infrastructure?
I think the gateway probably has a copy of them, maybe, but at least I think the intended, participant to store that kind of thing is the indexer, and the agent just saves those receipts into the indexer agent database, and then periodically converts those receipts into a voucher by calling the collect receipts endpoint. And then that voucher also gets saved into the indexer agent database until it's claimed on chain or redeemed on chain.
So there's no authority being shared between the conversion of receipts into vouchers and the gateway, for example. So the situation I'm thinking of is, again, a millennia later, you come down the line and you think, wow, now that's actually worth claiming that transaction. Where does the responsibility lie with the retention of that data so that you could do that? It sounds to me like it's all on the indexer side, which to me is acceptable.
I would agree. I think the other thing I'd flag is that at some point and I should also clarify, I'm speaking as somebody without intimate knowledge of what Edge and Node and the kind of foundation is up to, but at some point when the existing allocation exchange mechanism, whereby the gateway effectively is has a trusted key that signs receipts that can be signs vouchers that can be redeemed against the query fee pool, that's going to disappear and be replaced with the Connext vector stuff, and presumably at that point, I don't know, I would question whether vouchers can be redeemed after that.
Right. Yeah. That's a fair point. Well, I think that's everything we have on the table for Repo Watch, unless there's anything else anyone wants to discuss on the software side. So I put a little forum highlight section in, and I swear to you guys, I'm not copying the core devs call. It just, everything I've got in this list appears to have appeared also on the core devs call, so that's just the way it is. I wanted to highlight something that myself and Alex have been looking at, especially Alex, over the last week, and that's the IST, the indexer stress tool, the sort of the first release of that Semiotics have developed. If you look in the notes for the call today, I've made a link there to the forum post, so if you have any questions or you want to get in contact with the Semiotics team, you can do so via that. So they've created this tool as part of their Wave 1 Foundation grant, along with some collaboration on the Edge and Node side as well. It's an interesting tool. If you're on the core dev call, you got a sort of an insight into the approach they have taken. But at its core for us in terms of functionality, the current tool can generate random queries. It uses IBM's existing graph query generator, which can create random queries. And you can run as many of them as you like in parallel to just nuke an indexer instance if you wanted to. So I wanted to bring this up today so that Alex could talk a bit about his experience with it so far, what he's seen, what he's used it for so far, and maybe a bit about what he thinks we might use it for over the next few months.
Yeah, so it's an amazing tool. So I've tried it in many ways. First of all, you can use it, you can point it onto your graph node itself to load it. What it does is, from my knowledge and from what I see it's doing, it's analyzing the schema and is trying to generate like different possible queries, lots of them, and pull together case. It ended up having like 33,000 or something like that possible queries that will basically try to send into the graph node, and the nature of the tool is that it's not just a single query that is going to be cached in your Postgres or sorry, Kelvin, can you please mute yourself? I can't mute him. I did locally.
I've just dropped him down to the the audience.
Yeah. So where was I? Yeah, so it's generating random queries, which means they're not getting cached in your database or in the graph node itself. So it continuously loads the database, just as in a real scenario. And you have multiple possibilities here. You can either point it at the graph node itself, like I said. You can also point it at your service node. But with the mention of you needing to have a flag in the indexer service to allow free queries, otherwise you'd have to pay them. And you basically pass that token that you set in as a header, and you just smash your service node. And the third option, which is the most interesting one, and it's the one I've experienced. I've experimented with over the last few days, is overloading the whole network itself. So basically just routing those queries into the graph node, into the gateways, and then the gateways will distribute to each of the indexers, which is really nice to have for the testnet. Basically, you have constant traffic with real queries that will basically behave like in production, just in a way.
What have you seen then in terms of, you've run on testnet before, right? The load that's being simulated over there right now is pretty, I would say the queries are quite trivial. They don't you can do very high frequency of those, and it doesn't really cost, it's a lot of bandwidth, but it's not a great deal of compute expense, right?
I haven't tried that much, because I only run one single instance on my computer, which was running under WSL2 and was limited to like half a gig of RAM or something like that, so it wasn't that powerful. But you see in the logs, you've seen how many basically I'm not entirely sure if it was sending that many queries or it's just computing very long queries. I think it's the latter, because the number of queries wasn't going up that much from what I could tell. But it's definitely something that I would encourage the Azure Node team to start experimenting with. I already told Yanis that it's working on a specific branch due to some Cloudflare DDoS limitations. So that specific branch is called fixed in that repo, and if you pull it, it will basically retry failed queries until it managed to compile all the data sources from the schema. But yeah,
right.
It's working great.
And what about the service side of things, right? So if you point it at your service nodes, because you're not doing anything related to payments, right? You're using the free query token, the API token. I'm just interested to know, like one of the things that, early on in the testnet, certainly, Yanis was very clear that we were going to need to be able to scale up our service nodes very quickly. And I'm wondering if this is enough of a tool to give us the ability to continue to just, learn more about that scaling need, or is a lot of the effort that goes into running a service node actually the payment part? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we could be firing a ton of traffic at them, but we're missing maybe what might be a very important component in terms of actually the compute cost on the service nodes.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would try to ask for it, but I'm not sure if he can give us an insight. But Yanis definitely. But anyway, it's something that we could experiment with ourselves. I haven't run that many of the tests because I basically lack time right now. But I will, starting from this weekend, so I will keep you guys posted, I guess. Ford, do you have any comments?
Sorry, what was the specific question?
So, regarding firing free queries at the service nodes that we run. In the past, we used to have to be very careful to make sure and scale those service nodes horizontally to match whatever load we needed. This tool is only going to serve or test us via the free query token that you can configure on a service node. I'm just wondering how much of the load component of the service node is actually what's going on with the micropayments or the streaming payments. Are we missing a massive amount of the load profile on those servers if we don't use the payment side with a free query token?
That's a good question. I don't have a numeric quantification of that, but that is a large part of the indexer service path, and there's been huge optimizations to reduce that path and to use native calculations and Rust tooling, and so it is efficient. But I would recommend trying to test with that and being able to quantify that as part of the overall time and latency.
I wonder I guess we need to bring that up with the semiotics guys and see what they think, if it's something that they can simulate, and if the software as it stands today would support that kind of simulation, where we would continue to utilize the streaming function of the service, but we wouldn't necessarily be actually charging anything, right? We would just be trying to test it for load testing purposes.
Yeah. And further there, Giannis and Zach have been doing a lot of profiling of the indexer service and of the overall execution path for a query. So they do have numbers on what portion is spent on the different aspects of that path.
Oh, that's
we can follow up with some information there.
That would be interesting.
It's definitely still in flight, and there's a lot of things going on, but they do have performance numbers.
Awesome, that's good. We'd definitely like to see that.
I kind of have a question about the impact of that tool. So let's say that it followed the third option that you said, Alex, that they're going to be using the gateways. So I think what they're going to be doing is they're going to be training their queries cost model, like with all these new random generator queries. And then when they're going to deploy it, when a query gets to the gateway, it will have its estimated query cost. So then when it passes through the gateway, will all the indexers kind of have this kind of uniform cost model, or still we can choose our own cost model?
So the nature of the gateways is as follows. The requests come from users' website. They go into the gateways. The gateway picks the right indexer. The indexer saves the query back into the gateway, and the gateway delivers it to the user, from my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ford or Brandon. So yeah, at any point you will have the option to, the cost models are still relevant. Though this tool is only to load traffic and to simulate traffic in a better way than just sending meta block queries into the network, which are basically meaningless. I
mean, this is version 1, right? If you read the forum post, they're far from done, right? They're looking at version 2. And that's where all the interesting stuff comes in, Joseph, the bits that you're talking about there, where they're using non-linear NLP. They're using all these different techniques to create different types of traffic and learn about, costs associated with the traffic. I'm really keen to see what that actually looks like in the flesh. It's quite difficult to understand what a lot of it means, but I'd like to see what it looks like when it's actually generating cost models. Because some of these tools, these AI tools, machine learning tools, are known for creating really wacky things. So I can imagine the cost models that it might come out with would be rather exotic, right?
Maybe we can get GPT-3 into play, because that's maybe also.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about. Once they get to this cost model, if we believe their cost model is really perfect, is this gonna be the cost model for all indexers? Are we gonna all adapt it? And the same thing goes when they're using regression. So when you use regression, you're always dependent on the historic data. And if at some point you get a query that it's new type of queries, or big or different value or extreme value, there's gonna be a lot of bias in it. So yeah, it's not always when using AI, it's perfect.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we touched on this in the core devs call a little bit this morning, but the goal is definitely not to have a uniform cost model for all indexers. It's to kind of develop the tools that indexers can build cost models that are comparable to their configuration and performance of queries on their setup. It's a great point about coming up with the new queries, and being able to predict for something you haven't seen before. I think that's where a lot of the work on the query generation is coming into play. Is that instead of just relying on historical queries that you've seen in the network, they're trying to basically generate queries, such that they get a lot more coverage and a lot more quality in the data set than just relying on past data. But the results that we've seen from this, as Jim said, it is early, but it's been very, very encouraging. So to give some context, we did an investigation within EdgeNode maybe a little over a year ago. At this point, we spent a few months on this. We didn't open source it because it was using private data that we had collected from the hosted service, but we were doing various forms of regression, random forest models, different other simpler kind of hierarchical matching models, and Semiotics, I think within their first sprint working on this part of the problem, I think they were able to 3x some of our best baseline results in terms of average error, and so very, very encouraged by this approach, but agree that we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg. The other thing here is that this could, I think someone mentioned, what does this mean for Agora? This could end up influencing the semantics of Agora. So we might, depending on what we learn from these models, we might find that there's additional semantics that are useful to exposing the Agora interface that is what the gateway or consumers and indexers speak to one another. And that could either look like kind of escape hatches, to have more arbitrary logic, or it could be other sort of predicates in the DSL that that we find to be useful based on the investigation.
No cost model singularity then, guys.
Yeah, we'll see. Someone mentioned GPT-3 though, but they are using a lot of the same techniques as GPT-3, which is really fascinating. Since we know GPT-3's ended up being this very generalizable kind of AI tool.
That's interesting.
All right, guys, let's move on to. I had one other highlight from the forum, and again, it was on the core devs call. Ariel from EdgeNode has released a command line interface tool for managing disputes. It's an NPM package. Allows you to do various things like listing out the disputes, even create disputes, and it's a tool, I guess, for the arbitrators as well. Ariel, do you want to talk maybe briefly? I know you've already been through it, so you don't have to give us the full lowdown.
Yeah.
But if you want to do a very short summary, that would be really helpful.
Perfect. Can you hear me? Yeah, right?
Yep, hear you fine, thanks.
It's a TypeScript script you can install by using npm install. The first thing you need to do is a setup of the CLI tool. It's basically using graph disputes setup, and it's going to ask you a number of endpoints. You need to pass the network subgraph and a couple other things, an Ethereum node, and basically information that the CLI will use for listing and for checking disputes. That's the thing you do once. Once you're done, you can use some commands like list, where it's going to print information about the disputes and the state and the current status, if it's resolved, if it's opened, the indexer, the submitter, the information about the allocation ID, the epoch when it was created. I would say a great deal of information that is helpful for the arbitrators to decide, and also for other people to see the outstanding one. So then you have a show dispute ID, where it's printing more information and it's trying to figure out if the POI is right or not. Then what another thing it's doing is like you can, if you are one of the, well, if you're a disputer, you can create using graph dispute, create indexing and passing an allocation ID. It's going to ask you for the bond, for the bond, the deposit, and you can send the transaction. Okay. The same thing you can do with the query disputes by passing an attestation. It will create a transaction to the dispute contract. And finally, it has some like commands for the arbitrators to resolve the disputes, accept, draw, and reject. There's an option to print the payload, so you get the raw data that you need to send to the blockchain to perform one of these actions. So it's an initial version. There's some improvements that I can think, like I want to map some of the information that the tool is showing to map the arbitration charter, like let's say having like double jeopardy, or how is this called, the data availability and other things that are in the arbitration charter as titles, to put in the same organization in the CLI, so you can compare disputes easily and see if they validate or the charter or are wrong in a way. So
Yeah.
Open for feedback, and the repo is there, is open, and you can add open issues.
I think these future plans you have, to me, are very interesting. The idea that you could use a CLI to help you understand whether or not an event was, fell within the accepted rules of the charter or not, I think is potentially something very powerful.
Yeah. Even if you can create, there are some things that are not enforced in the contract. Like, let's say you can create a dispute on an allocation that was already resolved. But one thing that the script can do is to check before you create it, or even if you are listing, if the dispute is for an allocation that already was resolved, because we have that information in events. So it will help to catch many things, many conditions, and the arbitration charter can evolve, and the script can evolve with the arbitration charter to reflect that.
Yeah, it seems to me, Ariel, that this is potentially as critical as the charter itself, right? By which I mean, when we come to make a modification to the charter, we also need to be making sure that includes any, it's mandatory that we're also upgrading this tool at the same time, so that it reflects whatever modifications might have been made within the charter.
Yeah. It can make the arbitration charter to be more, I would say, parsable, like
parsable, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like there's a lot of information in the charter, and it's good to, like, everyone knows like how it works, understand the conditions, but sometimes a tool can help with that. Like you can have some checks and with some items that can say like true or false, and it's easier to read.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I've added links to the repo and to Ariel's forum post in the office hours notes, guys. So if you're looking to take a look, try it out, or contribute, the links are all there. We have a couple of Ariel, thank you very much for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We have a couple of sections left. Is there anyone who has any questions on this before we move on? All right. So we're going to talk about arbitration, some specifics around some of the conversations going on in the Indexer community. But I think what I would like to do, first of all, is bring Oliver up to just sort of a recap of what he presented today on the core devs call around one of many initiatives that he's working on around improving the experience for delegators. Oliver, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. So those of you who have not seen the dev meeting, core dev meeting, let me give you a quick recap on what we're trying to accomplish. It all goes back to Brandon's post in the forum that he initially posted back in January. It's called Delegation Feedback Rollup Thread, in which he summarizes about 6 broader topics of delegation feedback that he has received that had some sort of issues, concerns, or ideas to improve the delegation experience. And when we refer to experience, we typically mean either the process of delegating and or parameters around delegating. When you look at the forum activity over the last 6 months, what you see is that there have been a number of posts, about close to 24, I would say, that either have some overlapping content on what Brandon already had in there, or new suggestions, ideas, or issues that were raised and around which some degree of communication and engagement, has happened. Most of them not leading up to any sort of GIP at this point yet. So we went through this and have, since then expanded that list of 6 to what we now have. I think it's about 14 in total. And this is really thanks to Jim, who has raised that issue, so to say, about 2 or 3 weeks back, that there is so much stuff out there. It's a little bit uncertain to many of the folks that have been engaged in these discussions as to where they're at in the status. So we've taken that on and trying to consolidate, all the forum posts. And this is a cross-functional effort here where we have Ariel, part of the discussions, Chris, Jim, and also Chris Ewing from the delegator side. We wanted to get really sort of, broad group of folks, into the discussion so that we can really have every corner of the network reflected in it. What we're trying to do is to have a sort of roadmap, at the end of our discussions as an output that we can present back to the community. And that roadmap is meant to be a sort of prioritization view of what the community would like to see, being tackled first as it relates to the delegation, improvements that have been posted over the last 6 months. What we will post then is really, we want to get feedback from the community. This is just a workshop assignment that we have, and we try to be the proxy of the community as best as we can, but certainly looking forward to hear feedback on that roadmap, around whether it is prioritized correctly and whether there's overall alignment to that. For the core dev team, it then presents, some sort of guideline for them to understand as it relates to these items. This is how the community likes to prioritize it. So at the end of what I've presented earlier, we also have one GIP draft that is already out there. And this is from Ariel. I would really like to raise some attention to that because we're looking for feedback. And this is also something that touches the indexer community here, because it is all around, it is a post called Proposal to Change the Indexer Cut Mechanism. And in there, Ariel has posted with a HackMD link the GIP draft. And there are 3 key benefits that we're looking to get from this proposal. One is for the delegator. It provides a way to more transparently compare reward cut percentages as a way to understand what the cost is for delegating. For Indexer, it is a proposal that makes life a little bit easier just from an admin perspective. Typically, the approach from an Indexer perspective is continuity for APY, so to say, for delegators. and that needs to be manually adjusted today based on delegation changes that occur to an indexer account. And that is something that Ariel addresses, and also addresses what is known as the sandwich attack. So really want to raise just attention to that post in the forum. Please provide feedback. We're looking for engagement. We want to make sure that, you know, what we're doing here, you know, is in line with, you know, what the community thinks. And it's certainly one of the more important, you know, pieces when it comes to delegation. And, you know, as far as then the roadmap is concerned, we're having very deep discussions. We just had one this morning, and it is amazing how much of the topics correlate to one another. You know, you change one thing, you have to think about how does it impact, you know, other aspects of the protocol. So for us, it's really important that we get this right, that we don't put proposals out there that might have some unintended consequences. And it's also interesting to see that from a protocol design, you know, that we have, you know, understanding the constraints that we have, what we can and can't do, and the reasons why. So really good discussions that we're having right now. And, you know, I hope that as far as the update is concerned, back to the community in about 2 weeks or so, that, you know, we can present something back. So we wanted to give really everyone here a chance to maybe, you know, go deeper into some Q&A that you might have around it, especially for those who have also watched the core dev meeting earlier. Is there anything that somebody would like to go deeper into at this point?
This isn't a question so much as maybe a comment or a request, which is just, you know, looking at this process, I see a couple of ways that this could, like something like a roadmap could play out, you know, which is one is having like a roadmap of features or, you know, or specific improvements, which, you know, I think can certainly be useful. But the other is having a prioritized list of the actual problems and sort of feedback that that delegators are experiencing. And in some ways, I find that latter group to be even more useful, because when you can capture the feedback in a way that's implementation agnostic, you know, it allows it to be used as the input to like the mechanism design and, you know, just sort of creative design process. So really taking the time to, like, if someone comes up with an idea in the forums, you know, and someone says, hey, I want XYZ for, you know, the delegation market, making sure that we're drilling in and saying, okay, well, why do you want that? Or what's the underlying need for that? You know, a great example is I've seen a number of posts in the past related to changes to, I believe, the way that the cooldown period works for delegation parameters. And, you know, when you dug in a little bit deeper, it turns out that a lot of the current behavior around cooldown periods are actually has to do with this, you know, GIP that Ariel is working on about the effective indexing reward cut, and indexers wanting to be able to quickly update their parameters, you know, because we didn't have a stable effective rewards cut. So they would set their cooldown to 0. But if you didn't realize that dynamic was going on and you just jumped straight to, okay, how do we modify the cooldown parameter, you know, the cooldown mechanism to get people to set it longer, you might not realize that the underlying problem is actually related to, you know, consistent rewards for delegators. And so I think that process is super important.
Yeah, great feedback. A couple things. We discussed that when it comes to improvements, that doing it in incremental steps is important. We feel that with some of the improvements, especially like what Ariel has posted out there, a lot of the other things that have been raised as issues might already be addressed as well. And the other piece, Brandon, that you've mentioned here too, is the 14 items that we have on the list. They all have received varying degrees of feedback. So, you know, for some you can say, this is something community felt very strongly about. right? And you can say that there's been broad consensus here. And that in itself also will then factor into how we prioritize that. Whereas others, we might have seen only one forum post with very limited sort of reaction. That is not mature enough in a state where we can say that the community really wants that. There might have been just been one person raising it and maybe one or two others commenting on it. That might not be really sufficient enough to demonstrate support for any sort of change. So we're trying to be very thoughtful in that respect as well.
I think very important to note that there's 4 or 5 people on that call at the moment, or on working on this initiative with Oliver, and we have Chris Ewing, who is a very thoughtful delegator from the Graftronauts community, joining us for that, and his input is absolutely critical. So, this is a recorded session. I'd like to put the call out to anyone who's listening who's maybe a delegator, that we need more thoughtful delegators to help us understand the motivation and the behavior behind the problem statement, right? We'll often get the problem statement on the forums, but the actual behavior that's leading to that problem statement we don't have. And I think, Brandon, that's part of what you're getting at, right? If we're not cognizant of the motivation behind or the behavior behind the problem, then we may end up trying to fix something, the incorrect area, right?
That's exactly right.
The other very interesting thing for me for this group is we're straight into trying to make sure that we have these goals for each of these components of the delegation experience. And we need to be able to stay in touch with both what that means from a technical perspective. So Chris and Ariel are bringing huge amounts of value there in terms of, okay, wait a minute, it would take, it would be very expensive to do that sort of operation on the chain. We need to look at other alternatives. But then also keep, having Oliver tracking things at the top level, making sure that when we go into the deep conversations, we do come up for air and think about what the behavior is and what the end goal is. So I think we're doing fine on the technical side. I think we're doing fine on the management side or project management side. I would love to see more delegators be able to join us on that call. So again, anyone who's listened to this, listen to the recording. If you're a delegator or if you're on the call today and you're a delegator, please DM myself or Oliver. And assuming you're okay with that, Oliver, we could maybe bring another delegator or 2 in.
Absolutely, yes. The more the merrier, for sure. And we need it. You're right. Especially from the delegator side, because these are all about delegation experience, processes, and parameters. And you bring up an interesting point there too. What you said earlier. Take the thawing period, right? I think that's a great example. There's been quite a bit of activity around that piece, but it gets blurred because you find various posts where, one might raise the issue of the thawing period in response to a bad indexer behavior that he or she might feel has experienced and now feels double punished, also having to wait 28 days. So from a reasoning perspective, you kind of feel the empathy there. But then there are also other posts that say, well, the thawing period in itself, is something we don't like. And that becomes a very different discussion when you look at standard use case of thawing period to just undelegate, what is the reasoning behind here? And, is that something that the community really agrees to from an overall perspective? And if we were to say, go away with the thawing period altogether, what impacts would that have to network security, that we all are very interested in? So it correlates. Everything seems to be somewhat interdependent with one another. That makes it so exciting, to talk about it and dive deeper into it. But you're right, Jim. The more participation we have, also from the delegator side, the better off we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really interesting too, which is sometimes, especially as we look at this feedback in a vacuum, we'll find that maybe the feedback of one stakeholder group needs to be kind of balanced against feedback from, let's say the indexers or subgraph developers, or even just the sort of protocol welfare as a whole. I think we saw this with some of the first GIPs that we did that were more geared towards addressing indexer feedback. And we saw that there was sort of a disparity with how delegators perceive that change. But the thawing period is a great example, of one where, you could very easily over-index on the feedback and say, okay, let's get rid of the thawing period. But then when you take a step back and look at the protocol economics as a whole, and you look at, well, what's the role that delegators are playing? Well, it's, surfacing valuable indexers. Part of what gives that signal value is that they're incurring an opportunity cost if they do that job poorly. Then you might, from the lens of the overall protocol welfare, you may look at that decision differently, even if there is sort of feedback from a single stakeholder group that like to make that change. And the other thing there is just understanding that the changes that you make are, you already brought this up, Oliver, but they're not made in a vacuum, so something that improves the experience for one delegator, or let's say in the case of the thawing period, makes the costs of delegating less, is doing that for all delegators. So if you assume that, markets are kind of open and competitive, even though it might seem like, yes, you are improving this thing for a delegator, the fact that all delegators would then also be receiving that benefit means that you would expect that to influence the yields that would be available in the protocol from delegation, all other things being equal. A good analogy would be like the risk rating on bonds, right? You can have like AAA rated bonds, or you could have junk bonds, and bonds that carry higher risk tend to carry higher yields. If you make an asset a lot less risky, you would expect the market to kind of compete the yields down on that. And so there's these kind of knock-on effects that aren't always obvious when you just index directly on, like, if you try and take like feedback and turn that directly into a feature.
Good point. So yeah, we will try to be as distinguished as we can when we present back the roadmap. We want to be, on the one side, we want to be transparent and show the community, we heard you, we've got it all captured, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything on that list is something that we at this point would support necessarily implementing. There are certainly items on the list that need more discussions within the community.
Great. Well, Oliver, thanks for recapping. I know that's number 2 for you today in terms of going over that same content, but I think that was a bit more in depth about the actual, what's going on behind the curtain, and I think that's useful. Again, I did make a shout out there to delegators, but I think we'd be glad to have any stakeholder, if they're interested in this, to join us to bring their opinions to the table. Thanks, Oliver. So we are nearly out of time, and the last subject I wanted to talk about, and I'm not sure if we should really go. I'm not sure if we should go into it because it commands more time. Maybe we'll start it, and we might have to cut this short and go into it next week. But I wanted to bring up or recognize the failure of the open subgraph, which failed last week at some point. The open team are. I believe they're doing rapid upgrades on their subgraph or as part of their DApp, and because of that, they don't intend to fix the mainnet subgraph immediately, right? So the quotes I've seen are in a few weeks, right? So we don't know when that subgraph's going to be upgraded, so we can all jump back on it.
Yeah, they basically said in the coming weeks. So I think the same hour that subgraph failed, I went into their Discord. And
that'll be where I saw.
Yeah,
that's where I saw the screenshot then.
Mm-hmm.
So the situation is basically we have, a fatal errored subgraph with a similar signal weight to most of the live subgraphs on the network. It's certainly the migration partners subgraphs. The reality of that is that some indexers are choosing not to close their allocations to that subgraph. Why? Because the maths basically tell you that you can get higher rewards if there's less total stake on that subgraph. Most indexers have closed their allocations. I've certainly closed mine. Maybe I wish I hadn't closed it at this point, but I've closed it at this point, which means I can't go back on it. That's part of the charter today. You can't go back on it if it's fatal. So just in terms of, that situation and my opinion on where we stand with that situation, there's nothing at the moment in the yet to be ratified charter that says that, the way that certain indexers are hanging on to the subgraph is bad behavior or is punishable behavior. And in fact, if you're just looking at the maths and being a rational actor or a rational indexer on the network who wants to maximize profits for himself, herself, and their delegators, then it makes sense for the indexer to push the limits in terms of what they're allowed to do to maximize their profit. This is a rational thing to do in the face of ambiguous situations, which I feel like is where we're at in this, very early growth phase. So the question I wanted to put out, and we only have 4 minutes, so we will probably have to cut this off early. So the question I really have is, do we think this type of situation is going to be an issue with thousands of subgraphs? And are there modifications we need to make to the charter, to the way the dynamic works with a dead subgraph that has signal on it, to motivate people to move off the subgraph? Or do people think that there is no reason to move off the subgraph and it should still be rewarded to sit on it and serve up the stale data?
I'll just add, I guess, for completeness, that there is a discussion happening in the forum right now around updating the charter again to actually, on an ongoing basis, allow even a broken subgraph to earn indexing rewards, assuming that it has signal on it. I haven't weighed in there yet. I've been on paternity leave, but I'm sympathetic to some of those proposals as well. My personal opinion, Jim, just on your question, is that I think we're in this sort of weird bootstrapping phase right now, where the first batch of signal, of launch partner subgraphs have quite a bit of signal on them. I don't think that's going to be, it's unclear yet what the steady state is going to be of, when we do have thousands of subgraphs, what's going to be the average signal per subgraph. But I also think that, in the steady state, we can expect that subgraph developers will not want to lock up their signal indefinitely, especially if it's a large opportunity cost of capital. They're not going to want to lock that up indefinitely on a broken subgraph. And I think we could rely on those incentives to drive them to either upgrade their subgraph to a working subgraph or unsignal and use that capital for something else.
Right. It seems to me that, if a subgraph has stopped working, then there's some proportional reward that maybe an indexer would be paid for. How the function would look, I don't know. At worst, no indexer rewards, but you could serve the queries for the stale data, or some proportion of the indexer rewards rather than the full whack of the indexer rewards, because there's still value, right? Zach sort of outlined this very well in his forum post, that there is still value in a stale subgraph, right? Potentially, if it's failed, and Slim Chance actually set some really great context as well around why a stale subgraph might still be useful for a while to the developers who are trying to fix it, right? As an example. But I feel like, I know we're coming up against time and I'm doing all the talking here, but I feel like this all rolls, all these sort of incidents we've seen over the last couple of migrations, over the last couple of weeks or months of migrations, that we're going to keep having these events coming up and people are going to keep getting frustrated by them. And I just wonder, how do we settle people's minds that, most of the behavior, as long as it's not, outrageously malicious, that they're not going to end up getting slashed for it, right? I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from. It's just not knowing whether or not your behavior fits within the charter or not. But that's probably too big a question for anyone to answer right now, and we did only have 6 minutes left, but I think I'd like to try and get some more discussion going on this next week. So we're out of time. Let's leave it at that, guys.
Could I just say one thing before we
Sure,
close
Ford.
that off?
Go ahead.
I just want to make it clear that the arbitrators are not meant to be punitive or around to be like very overly detailed around the arbitration charter. It's meant to make sure that people are not getting indexing rewards for cheating the network, and there's not malicious behavior. They're not copying POIs from someone else, those kind of things. So I just want to try to reiterate that, so to be clear to everyone about, you know, how we're going to process these results. And in this time of a bit of ambiguity, there's, you know, that's an underlying goal of mine, at least.
Ford, can you remind me who else is it three people on the multisig for arbitration at the moment? Yourself,
Ariel, and I believe Giannis is still on it, or is he removed from it?
I think Giannis is the third.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So, for instance, if there's POI mismatches, and those are a result of software issues, that's not something that I will personally be voting as a dispute. So I just, you know, there are certain things that we're working out right now, making sure determinism is consistent, making sure the arbitration charter is super clear and everyone knows how to operate under it. And if there's oddities with the software or the charter, that's not what I'm looking to specifically.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you, Ford. Okay, we're a couple of minutes over, so let's leave it at that for this week, guys. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you everybody for your contributions this week, and we'll see you next week on Office Hours.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.